Hello, and welcome back to week 11 of our Applied Food Science course. And this week we are talking about one of the most integral parts to all of cooking, and that is our herbs and spices. So let's first break down, right? What is an herb? What is a spice, right? So herb, we're going to define as a plant leaf that has either been dried or can be used fresh. So these are things like thyme, oregano, rosemary, basil. That's my personal favorite. Whereas spices are dried, specifically dried, either seeds, pieces of bark, or even roots of plants. Now, one thing you might notice right off the bat from that definition is that one of our favorite flavorants of all time is actually neither a spice nor an herb. Can you figure out what it is? That's right, it's salt. Now, salt is a very interesting thing that we're not going to discuss too much, but it should be noted that if anyone ever says that it's a spice or an herb, they are incorrect. Technically, spices or salt is simply a rock. That's really what salt is. It's the only really flavorful rock that we know. So keep your eyes peeled for other ones, but don't go around licking the ground. Now on to spices. So what makes spices so interesting is that up till now, we've talked about foods that really have been mandatory to our survival. They provide nutrients and energy and key vitamins and minerals that help us survive, whereas spices and herbs are totally peripheral. They're entirely unnecessary. You could go your entire life and live a very healthy, productive life without ever once tasting an herb or a spice. So in that way, herbs and spices are a fascinating, unique facet to food science. So why do we use them, right? That's the good scientist question to ask here. So it all comes down to the idea of flavor. Now, we touched on this briefly a while ago, the difference between flavor and tastefulness, but I'd like to revisit it, right? So when we talk about tastefulness, right, that is simply the idea of what our tongue tastes. So when we refer to bitter, sweet, sour, savory, and umami, right? Those are our four tastes. And that's exclusive to our mouth. So if you ever think about if you ever have a really bad cold and you can't taste anything, yeah, you can. You can taste some stuff, but just the basics, right? Now, flavorfulness is a term we use to encompass the entirety of our eating experience, everything that goes into it, our smell, our taste, the feel of it, how it looks, all of that plays into the flavor. And herbs and spices specifically heavily play into that flavor. So why are they so important? Well, it turns out that a lot of what we consider flavor is what we smell. Our nose is fantastic at adding sensation to the stuff that we eat. And herbs and spices are fantastic at giving off amazing smell. So here's what we should stop and take a second to think about as something that's truly fascinating, is that when we add herbs and spices to our food, we're not actually adding anything that our tongue is detecting. Everything we're adding is detected solely by this guy, Mr. Olfactory up there, right? So everything that's on there, any of the pleasurable extra senses that we get from adding flavor comes from our smell. And now that provides a very interesting jumping off point to talking about what herbs and spices offer, because they offer what we refer to as aromatic compounds. Now, what the heck is an aromatic compound? Remember back to one of our first lectures, we talked about what is a compound. A compound is simply a fancy word us science folks use to mean several atoms or elements bonded together in any arrangement. And when we say aromatic, that just means that these things are light enough that they can evaporate into the air, so that they can float around and find our nose. Okay, so when we say aromatic compound, that basically means atoms that we can smell. Okay, so we have actually another word for this that I just want to make sure you guys are familiar with, and that is to say it's volatile. So the idea of something being volatile, you may hear that and you may think it kind of has a negative connotation, because through the years it's kind of come to mean, well, its root definition is something that smells strongly. And so volatiles kind of had that negative connotation. If something smells too pungent, you don't really like it. Now, when it comes to herbs and spices, volatile simply means that they give off aromatic compounds, so that they give off strong smells. And that's great for cooking. We want that wonderful aroma, okay? Now, when it comes to aromatic compounds, there is something that we should notice, and that is that aromatic compounds become much more active when they are exposed to high temperatures and oxygen. Okay, and we'll talk about kind of the applications of that later, but keep that in the back of your mind. So, now one of the big questions that food scientists and especially food anthropologists have had is, well, how did we come about adding herbs and spices to our foods in the first place? Because if you actually take a step back and look at, hey, what makes these herbs and spices so delicious? The compounds that are in there were actually mainly designed to be chemical weapons for the plant to use. So we talked about this a little bit when we were doing our surveys of fruits and vegetables, but keep in mind, plants, they don't move a whole lot. And so they need ways to defend themselves against things that want to eat them, that they don't want to be eaten by. And so one of the main ways that plants do this is they produce chemicals which are horrible to taste. And as it turns out, pretty much all herbs and spices that we have, the base compounds that give them their wonderful flavor to us are meant to dissuade predators from eating them. One of the best examples I could think of is if you've ever had raw garlic and you've taken a bite of it, it's gnarly stuff. It is bleh. But as we cook it and we release those aromatic compounds, it becomes much more dilute and actually really enjoyable for our palate. And so one of the ideas behind this is that as humans evolved and started cooking more, and we started finding these herbs and spices, and we found that when we altered them, they actually provided these really strong tastes that resembled a lot of the foods that we really enjoy naturally, right? So a lot of spices like cardamom here, they have really light citrusy notes, or kind of taste of pine, things like that resemble other foods that we enjoy, just in very concentrated doses. And so the reason that we started adding these, people think, is basically because they reminded us of other really good food, just in much more flavorful. And then we could add little bits of, say, citrus to our fish that doesn't normally have citrus, and give it a nice little extra taste. So now, while we're on the subject of these molecules, it's important to note that these molecules kind of come in two forms, and we've got names for them. There are the terpenes and the phenols. And you don't have to super remember what they are, but we're going to talk about it, and I'll point out the key things. So as far as terpenes go, the defining feature of a terpene is it's 5 carbons in kind of a zigzag shape. And then there's a bunch of stuff added on to the outside, and there's hundreds of varieties of these terpenes. But terpenes are the important thing to know about terpenes. They're what give things their piney or citrus flavors that like we said, right, with cardamom. Really enjoyable, but something to notice about the terpenes is that they're extremely volatile, much more so than the phenols or phenolics. And what this means is that if you have an herb or a spice that has that kind of citrusy, piney note to it, okay, think like rosemary, you want to add those later in the cooking. Okay, the more volatile something is, that is to say, if you open a jar of it and you're just hit with this aroma right away, that means that those flavor molecules, those aroma molecules, are coming out of the actual thing. And that's not great. And here's why. It's because the more that they're coming out into the air, the less they're going to be in your food. Okay? So if you